Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Writing Podcast. I'm your host Adam, and as always, I'm here with my co-host Lindsay. And this is the 21st episode, so the podcast is old enough to drink. Um, well,
Haha.
I guess I don't. Well, it's only 21 weeks, I guess, so maybe it shouldn't. But anyway, so we're going to attempt to have the podcast episode that we were supposed to have last week, and we kind of got off track and talked about everything else and publishing related. So tonight it's going to be a little less structured. Lindsay and I are just going to talk about characters and characterization and craft stuff like that. We asked for questions about that sort of thing earlier on social media and stuff, so we have 4 or 5 of those to go through as well. It's not too late though, so if you have any questions or comments or want to discuss characters, writing characters, especially characters that help sell your books or sell your future books when people like your characters, or sometimes if they hate them enough that they want to see what happens to them in the next one, make sure to leave comment either on our YouTube comments or on the best place is the main page for this episode, which is thewritingpodcast.com/21. So yeah, that was a big mouthful. But anyway, welcome back to the show, Lindsay.
Thank you. I'm I'll try to be excited and enthusiastic. I was telling Adam I was up really early and did a big long hike, so I'm like falling asleep. Plus I'm having the house the flooring all replaced. So they ripped out the carpeting and there's just dust everywhere and it's just killing me. It's like allergies, my nose is all stuffy and everything. So I may just sound stoned, and anything I say that's stupid, let's just blame it on the day and the week that it's been.
You were drinking before the show to celebrate the 21 number. So. But no, speaking of things going on too, now that we've moved from the desert near Phoenix to basically near Indianapolis, it was like 29 degrees here last night. So that was quite a shock after not experiencing that kind of weather for like 5 years. So I'm all like bundled up at the moment with a long sleeve shirt and 2 pairs of socks, which is totally relevant to characters. So anyway,
I understand it gets colder there.
a little bit. But we actually had to use the heat. It was quite the experience. So, all right. So I know, Lindsay, you jotted down some things about characters in general as well. So we'll just start off with, let's see, I have a couple of notes over here. As far as developing characters, do your characters just come to you, or do you kind of pre-develop them before the story and place them in roles in the story, or how do you come up with your characters?
I always consider myself a character-driven writer, and by that I kind of mean like I'm somebody who comes up with the characters first often, and then based on their motivations, their goals, the story will often come out of that. So yes, the characters often come first for me. That's not always the case, but especially as I get along in a series, I find that the stories are very much a result of what the characters are trying to obtain and how I can make it difficult for them to get those things. Sometimes when you've got something like epic fantasy, you'll often have the world and this huge overarching plot, and you kind of make the characters and then put them into this story. But I really try to make it character focused from the beginning, and I think that way you always, or your odds are good of having compelling characters, because there you come into the existence wanting something. I think when you do the plot first and then stick some characters in there, sometimes it's the danger is that they're doing things because the plot says they have to get to point A, point B, attack the evil overlord, whatever it is, solve the mystery. And then you can kind of get some flat characterization or the reader will say, it wasn't believable that this character was doing these things. So I think both ways are fine for coming up with stories. But definitely figure out early on, I try to, what the motivations are for the characters.
Yeah, and I agree too. One thing that I've noticed, not just writing, but reading all my life, I've noticed that um, books, movies, stories in general that may have bad plots, if they have good characters, I may still read the next one, or I may still kind of enjoy it, or at least enjoy a character or a group of characters that may make me continue when otherwise if they were not very well developed and had a bad plot, or even if the characters kind of sucked and the plot was good, I may not continue just because I don't like or feel invested in the characters. So making going the character driven route like you're going sounds exactly like the kind of stuff I want to read. I guess it's kind of like when you watch a bad movie, but it has like one actor that does really well in it, and so you may watch it again where otherwise you wouldn't. So that's kind of how I view it, with making sure your characters are the most important thing in the story. So
Right, and the good characters, and even if they're a little quirky, I like to use Monk for an example, the TV show that was on USA probably like 10 years ago now, but
right.
he had so many issues, and they were just these little sweet mystery, cozy mystery kind of stories. And normally I'm not really a cozy mystery kind of person. I've read some because my mom's a big fan, but I got sucked into that because the characters got so many issues and he was so quirky, and you felt bad for him because he really wanted to like be a normal person and get his job back on the police force. But he had all the, if you haven't seen the show, go find it on Netflix. It's pretty funny. And through those quirks, sometimes you can get a lot of mileage, and you can have a lot of humor, and sometimes the plot will even be affected by it. And it just makes it all seem much more organic, I think, rather than you can see the author's hand moving the pieces around on the big map that they've got planned out. So.
Yeah, Monk was a good show, and I was kind of in the same boat. I didn't really watch any of those detective things, but my wife and I watched every episode of Monk, so it's good for sure. And the reason why is obviously him. Like those little cases, they have those in all those shows, but how he solved it and dealing with his problems to solve it were always fun to see how he did it. So, so speaking of shows like that, and do you ever, as far as creating characters, first time you're coming up with them, how do you create them? Do you do things like cast from a show? Do you like, I want to make a character that's like a combination of Monk and someone from a different show, just to say, or do you use inspiration from people around you, or a mix? How do you get started on your characters?
That's a pretty good question. I've probably done it, I've written a lot of books now, so probably every way you can imagine. I've definitely done it though, where like I have a favorite TV show or something, and I'll be inspired by those characters. My current series, my Dragon Blood series, there's a colonel that's now he's a general. He's been promoted, but he's a pilot. And I just imagined this sarcastic, like always getting in trouble with his superior officers, kind of as one of his flaws. And maybe we'll talk about creating flaws later. But I definitely had O'Neill in mind from Stargate SG-1.
I knew you were going to say that. As soon as you said I knew what you were going to say. So.
It didn't hurt that Richard Dean Anderson was a quite handsome fellow, even in, gosh, he was probably in his 50s in that show, I'm not sure. But
you haven't seen him recently, have you?
He actually gained a lot of weight. I saw him at some Comic Con or something panel that he was on.
Yeah.
I was like, it was sad. It happens. You retire, you let yourself go.
MacGyver, what happened?
But yeah, so I have done that before, and I did another one. I really liked the sitcom Frasier, and I don't know if I've used that for examples before, just because the dialogue was fantastic in that show. And it's another one where it came out of the characters having little quirks and things. So I've done a Niles kind of character that's a little bit similar to the Monk character, maybe not so much, but like always he was wiping off everything, a little afraid of germs and allergies and that kind of stuff. So yeah, if I enjoy a show, I will definitely use it as inspiration, and that's a good starting point. Usually as things go on, you kind of make them more your characters, and they start to feel, when hopes, original and like something of yours.
Yeah, and I do the same thing, so it's a little different. So I know, well, if anyone's watched all the shows, or even before we started this one, the old podcast that we were on, we kind of had the introduction to ourselves video, you'll know that I write my own stuff on the side, or am writing it. And my wife and I co-author some other stuff under her name. So it's a little bit different, playing in her world with mostly her main characters and helping her develop those than the stories I do on my own. So the ones that I do on my own, I kind of cast, even, not setting out to do that. And sometimes it'll just happen that I'm making a character and I'm like, oh, that's pretty similar to this other character that I like. For instance, a post-apocalyptic story that I'm writing. I didn't really notice it until my wife was reading a few chapters, and she's like, this character seems awfully familiar Sawyer from Lost. I was like, crap, I did do that. So, but I don't see anything wrong with casting characters like that as long as there are some differences. And I think maybe it's a good idea too, because there's reasons why people like those characters and why they're favorites. And people remember them. And if they read the book and make those correlations, and that's fine, and it may make them like those characters in the new setting, so to speak. So.
Yeah, I think with actors too in TV shows, or there's a lot of the actor, the real human being in the character, especially as they go on and on over seasons. Whereas when you're just writing something, words on a page, you don't really have that to help you, So they can seem like not realistic, less human, because I think it really can help to kind of imagine a real person. And I've never really, I guess I'm trying to think if I've ever actually gone with friends. Maybe not. I just don't have weird enough friends. Some of the really quirky, fun characters I remember are from TV. I was going to say something else. It was going to be brilliant. I forgot what it was.
When you said Friends, I thought you were talking about the show again. Then I remembered, a long time ago when we had Mimi on the show, you were like, Friends? I know. I didn't watch Friends or something. Was it you or Trish?
No, I've never seen it. I mean, I might have seen like an episode or something, but it's probably one of those things where you should watch from the beginning to get into it.
So that's a good segue that you said Friends, and I mentioned Mimi talking about that because she actually posted a question for the show. So we might as well just go ahead and answer that now, I think. So so she had a couple questions, and if anyone doesn't know, Mimi was has she been on the new podcast, or we invite her just on the old one?
No, she was on this one, and somebody left a comment that was like she talked about herself too much or something. Sorry, Mimi, we were enabling you. I thought it was fine. I enjoyed the show and the interview.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite ones.
We've had her
talk on, but I thought so. But we were bridging a gap straight from the old podcast we did to this one, so I wasn't sure which name we were under at that point when we had her on. So anyway, let's see. Her question was, you come up with any like signature catchphrases or gimmicks for your characters, or just wait and see if anything like that happens organically? So is there any, like, you're talking about quirks and things, do you come up with that when you're first developing the character, or do you kind of wait and see if they do something like that and then make that part of that character?
Maybe a little bit of both. Sometimes I'll just think of something like as I'm thinking up the character in my head, and then if so, I'll include it. Other times I will actually have the problem now where I've written, I don't know, 25, 30 novels, however many we counted up last time, between myself and the pen name. So for me, it's actually a challenge not to have all the characters start to feel the same after a while, especially my heroines are often, there's like a lot of my personality in there and my interests. And so by giving them some interesting background tidbits, it gives me something to build on to hopefully make them not all feel like the same person. I think she asked about catchphrases, right? I don't usually do that.
Yeah, catchphrases or gimmicks, so something about them that maybe makes them unique, something they say often, things like that.
It makes me think of like 80s stuff, like the A-Team, I love it when a plan comes together. And I'm trying to think, I want to say I don't see that as much now, but maybe I'm just not that observant or watching all that much television. I think it's easy to become a little hokey with that sort of thing. But sometimes it does just happen organically. If you've got a character with a really strong personality, like I don't think when the original Star Trek was on, they knew on episode 1 that Spock was always going to be like, that is highly illogical, Doctor, comments about logic. But that became, after a while, you knew he was going to have a comment about something being illogical or that is logical. But it was probably rather than they decided let's give him a catchphrase, it's just something that was built out of the character. So that'd be kind of how I would go about it if something like that came up. And maybe my readers would actually be the ones to ask if some of my characters have that. I may not even be all that conscious of it. I know I have an assassin who there's like 8-9 books in that series, and whenever he's training or teaching or something, he's not the kind to give high praise. He's always like, that's acceptable. And if you get an acceptable, it was like really good, you were awesome. So apparently he's said that enough times now that I guess that's its catchphrase.
So he does have a catchphrase. And also, I would say that it depends a lot on genre also. I know Mimi writes a lot of comedy-based romance and things like that, more quirky things. So I think it'll depend a lot on the kind of stuff that you write. And, the second part of hers was kind of funny. She's like, how often should you use it? What's acceptable in a 75,000 word novel? So I don't know. Not more than once a page, right? So.
Probably less than you think. One thing I've definitely noticed as a writer and as a reader and somebody that critiques other people, it takes a lot longer to write. So you kind of forget how often you're doing something. Like 10 pages ago might have been forever, depending on how fast you write. That could have been weeks ago. So you've forgotten that they said that thing. And so you're like, oh, it's so delightful. I'm going to have them say it here. And hopefully if you have like a good analytical eye and can, analyze your own stuff pretty well, you'll catch some of that when you're going back through and reading it. But I know sometimes authors don't. And just anything, be careful of being repetitive. Like, in comedy, there's like the rule of threes. So I would say probably 3 times in a book or something like that. After that, I don't know. If it's kind of tough if you're writing like a romance or something and it's only a one-off. In a series, it's a lot easier to build something and kind of have that phrase. If he uses it once or twice a book, that will still stick in people's minds, especially if they're reading them back to back. I would just say err on the side of less being more.
3 times is acceptable.
There you go.
No, I've noticed that as well. And anyone that's probably self-edited their work, before you send it off or anything, or just rereading your stuff, definitely be mindful of that, because even using, a common word, so nothing quirky or unique to a character or a common phrase or something like that, in 2 paragraphs in a row, or even on the same page. I mean, when I'm reading a book and I see that, it stands out a lot. And sometimes it jumps out even, for example, I was doing a format last week for someone, and I just happened to see that like the second or third to last word in one paragraph was one of the first few words in the next paragraph. And so that made me stop. I usually don't read the format, so just format the book. But that made me stop and like read those couple sentences. And I was like, man, it just doesn't sound good. So I let them know. So from a reader standpoint, those things do definitely stand out. I mean, that it definitely did on theirs, and I wasn't even reading it. My eyes just happened to notice that pattern. So definitely be careful saying the same thing or same words over and over. So
I think Hannibal said, I love it when a plan comes together only once per episode at the end of the episode. So there you go.
Yes, words to live by. We're referencing all kinds of like 80s TV.
I like doing TV because more people have seen them. Like I have some books I could use for examples, but I'm less certain people have read them. So especially if it's not their usual genre.
That's true.
Everybody's seen the A-Team.
Yeah, we were just talking before the show too, how like at my new place I have my movie shelves behind me. It's like no books, all movies. And then I was like, I should fill them up with books so that people think I know what I'm talking about when we get on here instead of movies. And then we get on here and talk about movies anyway. So
Sorry, messing it up.
All right. So during that, we had someone else leave a question. So I think we'll just go to that. It's kind of related, so might as well pick it up now. So Serena on the page asked, do you ever sit at the computer, put your fingers to the keys, and just kind of have a character appear to you? So you said that a lot of times you'll make the characters, or at least the rough idea of a character before you put them into a situation or a plot. Is there ever a time that you don't do that and you're typing need a character instead of really thinking out the character? You just sort of develop it on the spot?
I would say for me, not so much, just because I tend to be an outliner now and somebody who's kind of plotting things out ahead of time. I'll be like out walking the dogs and thinking of my story and have something pop into my head there. I've definitely had cases where, and I'm not sure if maybe she's asking this too, like where you think somebody's going to be just like a minor character, maybe that you kill off or something, and then they end up having more of a personality and being more interesting than you expected. I have a couple of those in my Dragon Blood series. I totally was thinking of them as red shirts when I made them, and I even asked people on Facebook, just give me three names. These people are going to die. And 2 of them refused to die, and they're now series regulars and are quite memorable characters, I think. So I I have had that experience where you're kind of surprised at who comes out of nowhere and becomes a show stealer. I think a lot of writers have had that experience.
Yeah, for sure. We've done that. In my wife's novels and in when I'm writing, I've had that same situation. One thing I'll say though is that you don't need to be more clear about it. You don't need to like completely develop everything about a character before you put it in. So there are going to be lots of times and opportunities throughout when you're writing about them, and you'll discover more about that character that you had already fleshed out before you wrote, like even the quirks and things, or maybe things they like to do, personality traits, past, just all kinds of things that you don't need in the very beginning or before you start writing, but that just sort of happen when I'm writing sometimes. Like, oh, all of a sudden this guy, doesn't, I don't know, has never liked religion is one. Like the novels I write always have kind of undertones of things like that, or this girl doesn't like spaghetti, but I didn't know that before I put it at the beginning. So I mean, discovering your characters that you've already made as you go along, I think is pretty normal though.
Yeah, I think you should know the motivations kind of from the beginning because that's going to affect the plot. But little things, you can definitely add that. With the colonel I was talking about before, who's now a general, I don't want to slight him or anything.
And you love this guy.
Yeah, in the first book, I was very much I got the idea for the story and I wrote it in like 3 weeks. And that was kind of one of the first books I did in that kind of speed. And I finished the rough draft and I was reading through and I'm like, well, he's not bad, but maybe he's a little too perfect. Maybe I should give him a little quirk or flaw or something. And I gave him, it's like a fantasy world. So I gave him this dragon luck charm and that he rubs for good luck before he flies into battle. And I just figured, I don't know that many pilots, but I've heard that why not be superstitious? You're taking your life in your hands every time you go up there. So I definitely know from athletes, from sports, you get a lot of weird little superstitions and people that always have to do things the same way and have little quirks. So I thought, yeah, that I could see somebody having like something like that. And I only referenced it a couple times in that first book, but it's really become a memorable part of his character as the series has gone on. And I do think those little things like that can help make a character interesting, differentiate them, make them memorable to the reader. And like I said, I didn't have it in the first draft. It was something I added in as I was editing.
Right. Yeah. And as you discover those things, like you were talking about there, they can become big things, and they can give things to build further stories or books or side stories on also, which I think has happened a lot too. In the second book of a series that my wife and I wrote together under her pen name, there was kind of one of those semi-important characters, but not too much about them. They weren't really vital to the story, and they ended up becoming one of the main characters later on in the series. So I don't know, things can definitely change, but I think having a good idea of what the characters want and everything early on is good. And you were talking about flaws. I know that's something we wanted to talk about in the show, so that kind of segues pretty well. There's this really common thing that all your characters have to be flawed or have a flaw, even your hero, which I kind of go towards that side. I like characters that seem more real or gritty type books and have those flaws. I know there's definitely some successful books and good books where the main character is like perfect. But how do you come up with your character flaws? Are they before the story, or are they something directly to do with the story? How do you do those?
Probably same kind of as quirks. If you start, I tend not to make characters usually that are we should talk about like the Mary Sue or the Marty Stew character. They're great at everything. They're chess master. They're brilliant. They've got a PhD or 3, and a black belt in whatever, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
But they don't like spaghetti.
Yeah, but you get those kind of characters and often the reader will either not connect with that kind of character or kind of resent that kind of character, or you start to wonder, like, what does this matter for the plot? Is it, and I guess the psychology behind it is this author wish fulfillment is what they often say. It's like, I don't have any of those things, so I'm going to make characters who are incredibly awesome. But yeah, that's something to generally avoid, is those kind of characters. So I think by creating flaws for them, it makes you not make them too perfect, or like maybe they can still be really good at something. That's something when we read, we often want to read about characters. I mean, there's like the everyday man hero. That's definitely a thing. Lord of the Rings, the hobbits were all pretty much those kind of characters. But a lot of times as readers too, we're really drawn to those characters who are a little better than we are. Maybe they're not perfect, but they get to say the things we wish we could say. And maybe they're competent usually. I would say fantasy and science fiction, that's pretty typical too. And like even in some of the detective things, it's like, they have these problems, but they solve the mystery in the end. They're really good at that thing. So I guess the flaws for me is just looking ways to balance out characters that might be too good to be believable or relatable. By giving them some weaknesses, the reader can kind of like see, okay, they're human. I have that same problem. I'm a total klutz and a clutter freak, and I always spill my soup on my shirt when I'm eating. So, so that's, I guess I just do it kind of organically.
So deciding on the quirks for you, or I guess the flaws, especially if you're making the character completely, well, I guess not completely, but like in tandem when you're thinking out the plot, do you always make their flaw relatable to what the story is or the plot? I mean, you were talking about things being realistic to the reader. Sometimes it's a tight balance there too, because you don't want to make it too perfect that, their flaw just happens to be exactly what stands against them in this book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I probably do not think about the plot too much when I'm coming up with their flaw, but again, with some of the quirks and motivations that they have as their background, sometimes. And for those of you that have Scrivener, they actually help you out. They've got character sheets over there that you can fill out, and it asks you like, what's their physical description? I think it may say something about background and that kind of thing. So you can fill it in so you can remember these things. But sometimes I will like have minor plot points revolve around that sort of thing. In one of my early series, the main heroine is she's kind of an everyday hero. She's okay, she's competent, but she's definitely like a neat freak, and that's a bit of author wish fulfillment there, because I'm not a clutter. What do they call it when you like live in your house surrounded by telephone booths?
A hoarder.
A hoarder, telephone books. Yes, I'm not that, but I'm not a super neat freak. So she is, and she's found kind of clues that have been helpful in over the series, just because she starts tidying things up. Like even if she can't not do it, it's that compulsive kind of thing. And so she's found clues like by cleaning the villain's desk, or, at that time they didn't know that was the villain. But so, I wouldn't want it to be too convenient for the plot for a major plot point, but
right.
Once they have that trait established, sure, it's kind of fun if you can use it, and maybe, and equally often they can get in trouble because of it. I think that's probably the more of the purpose of the flaw, is something that's, Superman's kryptonite, right? The bad guy's going to use it against him, so it makes him more vulnerable, more human.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, though, you just want to be a little bit careful that's not too convenient. You want to do that with everything, and not just characterization of things. And you can have whole side stories or later books maybe revolve around it, and or things happen because of it, like you said, is really a good thing to have. But you never want to make things too convenient, like, you can see it coming from a mile away, or, that's why the author added that fear in there, or something like that. So, and I don't remember the name of the book, but like maybe a year or two ago, I read a decent book, and this detective woman was like afraid of spiders, and it happened to be that the serial killer that took her used spiders to bite his victims and things, and I was like, of course it would be spiders. So
yeah, I think Indiana Jones fell into a couple snake pits along the way too.
Every villain ever has snake pits, no matter where they are. Antarctica snake pits, right?
Oh, now I'm like, I've used snake pits before. Wait a minute. But one other thing I would say when you're kind of thinking up flaws is, I think is be careful, I would say, about making the flaws too unappealing. I don't know, in mysteries, guys always seem to have alcohol problems, the male character, which can be okay, but depending on how you write it, it can be something that makes you less sympathetic toward the character. depending on what their flaws are, or if they're just kind of an ass. Can we say ass? Are we PG-13? I don't remember.
Yeah, we're 21 now, and we're also at nighttime, so we can say
Right.
whatever we want.
So there is such a thing as a I can't even think of the name now. Unsympathetic hero, dark hero. You know what I'm thinking of.
Right, like anti-hero type.
Anti-hero. There's the vocabulary word I couldn't think of. And that's a thing. That's a valid device in writing. But if you're doing a series and you want people to keep coming back for the characters, you know, I'd probably go for more sympathetic, likable characters that are in some way appealing to the reader. It's sort of like the more unlikable the character is, the more flaws you give them that make him unlikable, the better of a writer you have to be to pull it off and make it all work anyway. You have to be, the story has to be really compelling, and you probably still be better off. I mean, it's whatever. I'm not telling you guys what to do, but if you want to sell books, probably likable characters are the way to go for the most part.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what we're mainly talking about in these craft episodes are, with the purpose of writing things that are going to sell and not just sell, but retain, like anyone that reads those books, they're going to want to read more of yours. And like I said, there's definitely some series and shows, movies where the bad guy or the anti-hero, either one, is the best character. And you can still have those characters, I think. So, you can go out and write a book where that is the main character, of course. But as far as trying to sell the most, I think it's a safer bet making your main character to be likable and have flaws. There can be things that people don't like about them. That's completely fine and normal. I mean, think about your friends. I'm sure you can name at least one thing about each of your friends that you don't really care for or don't like. And it's the same way with your heroes. I will say, though, if you want to write one of those characters, and it's fun to do, you're going to have more than one character. Usually you're going to have more than one good guy in your books, too. And you can make the side character, the ally, the friend, you can make them be sort of an anti-hero. In fact, in the most recent series that we started, the main character, is a good, nice, upstanding guy, right? He has his flaws, of course, but the side character that he gets kind of paired with is like a real jerk, and he says things kind of bluntly. So we get to have him say those dialogue parts that we kind of wish the main character could say as a jerk. So this guy kind of says what the main character would be thinking, sort of, in a way, but that he would never say. So you can kind of flesh those parts out using other characters. So do you ever do that too, Lindsay, or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I would say that if you do want to do some obnoxious characters, you can get away with a lot more if they're side characters. Or even if you want to do like the really smart genius Mary Sue kind of character, if she's the side character and is actually the heroine maybe doesn't like her that much because of she's too perfect, you can get away with more. And I've had that too with one of those red shirt characters I mentioned that I was going to try to kill off. Actually started out as an antagonist, and he's still a little bit of an antagonist in the series. He doesn't really like my hero that much, despite rubbing the dragon charm, which is very charming. But and then you would be surprised. People can start to like those characters, especially if you write with a lot of humor. That's sort of like if you're funny. A lot of times the villains can even be charming in a way, and people will like them. Going back to like really old movies, which or not really old, but 80s and 90s, there was the Robin Hood with Kevin Costner. I still remember because nobody was really impressed with Robin Hood, Kevin Costner, but everybody liked the sheriff, and he had all the best lines. He was hilarious. Was it Alan Rickman? I don't remember. I never remember actors, but
yeah, I can't remember either. I know which movie you're talking about. I can remember like scenes and things from it, but I haven't seen it in forever. So
yeah, it was that I was at that age where I like to watch movies 10 times, so I remember that one. But yeah, so humor can go a long ways too towards even taking a character that's kind of unsympathetic and making the reader like him, depending if humor is your thing, and it's not everybody's ball of wax.
yeah, and reading and watching things, a lot of times those characters end up being some of my favorites, but if you think about it, and if they were in like the main role, if it was reversed, if that was the main person it was focusing around, I may not like them as much. And it's kind of a weird psychological thing, I guess. It just depends on whose head you're in or whose viewpoint you're looking through in the story. But very similarly, one of my favorite characters that we've ever come up with and that I had the biggest part in crafting, she started out as a, I guess you would say, a mini boss for anyone that plays, games and things. Like, she wasn't the final boss of the book who they needed to defeat or whatnot. And she was kind of in the middle, like leading up to that. And she was originally supposed to be, killed, but she ended up being one of my favorite characters, and eventually becomes like a pseudo ally where she helps them when it's sort of convenient for her story arc. And I don't know, I've always kind of liked that sort of anti-hero's side character, not main protagonist, being that way. So as a reader anyway, and I think that translates over into when I write too. So so speaking of arcs and things like that, one of the things I wrote down when I was just trying to brainstorm a little bit on things that I do on characters, and I didn't always do this, but it's helped out a lot. Lindsay, when you write a book, usually about how many like main characters would you say that you try to? I know it's probably not a set number for every book, but around how many like good guys do you write extensively in a book?
Coming out of the fantasy background, I think it's really tempting to make the adventuring party. We've got the elf ranger, the dwarf warrior. No, I don't do those exactly, but I'm used to kind of the buddy films, as they call them, buddy books, I guess. So I will often have a cast of maybe 4 to 6. If I'm doing more of a romantic theme, then it tends to just be the hero and the heroine. And I enjoy writing those stories because they're so much simpler for me as a fantasy author who, may end up doing 4 or 6 point of view characters otherwise. But yeah, I think that either, one person tends to be driving the action in the novel. Like in a series, it may alternate who's kind of the lead character with the biggest motivation that, they're trying to solve this one thing. So one core really guy really at the center of it. With romance, it can be a little bit both sides, but even with romance, I often find that it's more one person's story than the other. And then a lot of the other supporting characters. And if you write a series, you will always end up like, I think it's natural to have more of the characters that people start to like, and you want to flesh them out more. So, I've had series like my Dragon Blood stuff started with 2 point of view characters in each book, and it's up to 4. And now I'm like, I could see if I kept going with this where I'd want to do more, but it gets to be more challenging to write those.
You have to start killing people off. So
I killed a minor character.
I meant the point of view characters.
Yeah,
like George.
They started as romances, kind of the first couple. So it's kind of a rule in romance: you don't kill it's got to be a happily ever after.
Yeah,
but
that mistake. So.
I've killed people, and I've killed people. That doesn't sound good just by itself. I've killed characters.
Yeah, be careful. People can take sound bites out of this and use it against you.
You'll be arrested. So I do think that in fantasy, possibly more so than other genres, but probably other ones too, it's possible to have too many characters and to get a really big cast. And then you run into the problem where people, like a character only comes up every 50 pages or something, and the reader's not going to remember. I mean, some readers have excellent memories and remember everything, but you get people like me who are like, who is this character? Am I supposed to remember this name? And on the Kindle, fortunately, you can actually go back and search for them. But if anybody has to do that, if somebody's having to go back and search to see when this person was brought up, that's probably not a good thing. You probably have too many characters. And it's just something to consider. Like a lot of times you'll find if you outline first and you notice yourself having all these characters, you can look at it and say, I think these 2 characters kind of fulfill the same role, so maybe I'll just make them one character.
Yeah, for sure. And I've noticed having too many, and sometimes it happens in a longer series because you need to add something new coming in, right? New situations, new people coming in to make it interesting, and you can end up with those huge casts. And so it is one of those balancing acts. I was just reading your comment, Lindsay. But no, and one of the things I was getting at too that we started doing recently, I wish I would have done it way back when I first started, is of course, a lot of people plot their stories, plot their novels, write beats or whatnot. And it seems like that's becoming even more popular. People that have never done that are starting to try it. I think part of that may be the popularity of like Libby's book, who was on the show before, has a great book on outlining. So I see a lot of people referencing that, trying it for the first time. And one thing that I wish I would have done in what we did in this last series is we actually wrote down like all the main characters, bad guys included, but focusing kind of with the most important down to maybe like second level. And before we wrote the book out, we tried to think of the arc of that one character. We did that for each of them, not just the hero. And that helped a lot on the writing and even like the beats type stage. So for instance, what all needs to happen to this character and how do they grow throughout the book, and what are some things that they need to find out or things that they need to do in this book. And we did that for like all the main characters, including the bad guys, not just the hero in this last series. And that helped a lot. So have you outlined any for side characters as well, not point of view characters?
I've often, with my first series, I was very much like, oh, I can just keep everything in my head. And I did do a lot of that in my head. My second main series wasn't never meant to be a series, so I didn't do much of that kind of thing. And I very much have been writing it on the fly. What if that's you or somebody listening? I would just say take really good notes as you write, so that you can remember that. Oh yeah, this was this character's. But I think what you're saying is a really good idea. And probably if the next series I'm starting, I'm getting better about planning more in advance before just starting writing, especially if I'm planning for it to be a series. But I definitely think it's important to keep in mind all of the motivations for the characters, and they shouldn't all have the same motivations. I kind of joked about the fantasy adventuring party, but it's really boring if you have these 6 characters and they all get along. They're all aiming for the same thing. They wouldn't think of betraying each other. As an example, going more TV examples, I really liked that in Firefly, the cast was very much like, you never knew if Jane was going to maybe sell out the captain for enough money. And he was kind of trying to betray Simon and his sister. And so you kind of had some characters in that cast that had their own motivations, were trying to have their own lives. So they weren't all just one big happy family. And that makes just really much more interesting reading and more interesting writing too, when you've got some of these motivations are going to naturally conflict with each other. So you end up having conflict within the group, even though they're maybe all the heroes or the allies are working towards the good guys, trying to defeat the bad guys. When you do plan ahead and have everybody has their own motivation, you just get a lot more interesting dynamics within the group, in addition to having your villain or external problems that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, not all the good guys are going to be out just to help the hero or just for their benefit. I mean, you have to think about what they want, and that's what I think that arc per character helped a lot with in the last or in the current series that we're doing. Is we actually looked at them. What if they were the hero of the story? What if they were telling it or thinking about it from their point of view? What do they need to change in the book? Because I noticed something with past books early on, ones that we did, is and it hasn't really been pointed out very much. I mean, but from my point of view, the main character had a lot that changed, a lot of things that happened in this time frame, in this year, or however long that series was. And the side characters didn't really change or develop as much. I mean, the bad guys, the main characters did. But, all during your story, if this was real people, they're going to have their own revelations and reasons for doing things. And, it's not going to always be support the other person at all costs out of the goodness of their heart sort of thing. I think that comes back to that anti-hero secondary character that's always kind of been my favorite archetype, is they're in it for themselves, and if that benefits the main character, that's fine, but when it doesn't benefit them, they're less likely to do it like real people. So definitely want to make all your characters seem real and like they're doing their own thing, what they would do if they were the hero of the story. Even the bad guy, why are they doing what they're doing? If it was told from their point of view, what what would they do, thinking that they're the hero of the story, so to speak. So, and that kind of leads to the next point I had written down is writing villains or compelling bad guys. And another hard one is writing bad guys or main bosses that people like, even though they're bad, And so, how do you go about with characterization for the bad guys?
All right. Well, I'm kind of different from a lot of fantasy authors. I don't know how much this is true in other genres. In mysteries, and thrillers sometimes too, often you'll get point of views from the enemy camp. And I always hated those as readers. I skimmed them. And so that was my thing to myself, was like, I'm not going to do those. I'm going to figure out how to keep conflict tension high without doing those things. And so far, it seems to work okay. Most people don't say like this story was boring. I tend to keep the pacing pretty quick, but so you don't always get to see that much of my villains. They don't have a lot of on stage time. They're often just this presence in the background. But yeah, as we were talking about before, humor is definitely a way to make the villain kind of interesting, memorable. But you already said it. Somebody else said it very cleverly, that the villain is the hero in his own world. Nobody's just, I'm going to be bad today. Let's be bad. Everybody wants something. And so it's useful to think of like, what are your own concerns and selfish, look at your own selfish parts. Some of us are better at hiding them than others, but I think we all have, like, okay, I want to make X amount of money. I want to figure out how to be financially independent. So money is a big motivator for a lot of them. In fantasy, there's always somebody that wants to take over the world, but I don't know so much in other genres how much you get that. But a lot of people, if you kind of explore, and it depends how psychology-esque you want to get, but explore what their childhood was like. Did they have like a father that they could never live up to their expectations, and they're still trying to prove themselves to that person? It's worth thinking about some of those things, because the villain should definitely have his own motivations too, and it's just going to be more conflict because it's against what the hero's wishes are, of course, and possibly against society and the greater good as well.
Yeah, and one thing about writing bad guys too is when you're writing the hero, you're trying to think of a relatable flaw. You can also come up with some bad guys, even if it's not like I said, main boss of the story, right? The main bad guy, main villain. By thinking about a hero that has a flaw or a really bad flaw or a few that's actually been overcome by those flaws, how they became that way. Because like you said, realistically, at least, it does happen, and it's obviously been in books and movies that have done well in some instances. But overall, the bad guy doesn't just, live a normal life and then get out of bed when they're in their 30s and it's like, you know what, I'm gonna go kill some people. I'm tired of this, But yeah, that's one way that I've looked at it too, is someone that could have been the hero, but they've been overcome by these other things, these flaws that maybe if you gave them to your hero, they would have overcome the flaws to be the good guy. It's kind of the reverse for the bad guy, if that makes sense.
Right. And even in society, you'll see that where people, maybe they could have been a good guy, but they grew up in circumstances that were just, they weren't treated fairly. It was a really rough life. They never, had to join gangs or, whatever is going on in your world that makes sense for you. So sometimes you can actually take two people that would be like the same people, and depending on the world that shaped them, one becomes the hero and one becomes the anti-hero or the villain of the piece.
Yeah, and those ones are always really fun reads and stuff for me too when I hit things like that. And I know there's an example I had it in my head just a second ago, but I know like there's a famous like comic book example or something where people were split off and kind of had the same sort of path, but they chose different outcomes to their paths growing up or developing, and they became different people. And like you said, in real life, someone that's given the opportunity to, two people have a bad childhood. One decides to join a gang, one decides to join like a ministry or something. They're going to have vastly different lives branching off from there, even if they start out the exact same. And having those, like you said, sometimes having like a reverse mirror of the main character is pretty fun to do also, and can make for some interesting tension and scenes and things. So
Yeah, I'm also a big fan of, as a reader and a writer, of two heroes. They just happen to be, this guy's on one side of the war and this guy's on the other side of the war. So you get very, very human characters, but just the circumstances that they're in, that they have to be enemies. So that's kind of a recurring theme in a lot of my stuff, is like the guy's not a supervillain. He's the hero for his people, and but we're reading from the other country's point of view. So, and I think that can be kind of compelling too, when you've got like a honorable hero that you actually could see like, oh, he'd be okay if if he wasn't trying to bomb our country, he'd be okay.
Yeah, and those are always fun reads, like you said, and situations. So, two things popping in my mind when you said that is one, I won't say any specifics, but for instance, on the Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones novels, he does a really good job on that. Of course, you get to see every nation's side of the story, side of the war, and sometimes you'll really like people on opposite sides. Like they're both really good people, and it's just that they were born in this country, the other one was born in this one, so that's who they fight for and how they were raised. But otherwise, really upstanding. Well, in his book, no one's upstanding, guys, but you get my point. And it may come to terms where those two have to fight, and one of them has to kill the other or something, and you find yourself in a situation where you're like, I don't want either of these guys to win or lose. And those are always, those are probably like some of the most tense moments you can have in books and film and stuff. And I mean, they are very memorable because of that, and you're going to get people talking about it or going to the next book and stuff. And I mean, people have been doing this for, of course, hundreds and thousands of years. I mean, there's all the way back to like the Iliad even, right? So like Hector and Achilles, everyone likes both of those guys. They're both good on depending on which side you're looking on, and they fought to the death outside of Troy and stuff in that story, or if it really happened. But yeah, those are always compelling, and they always have been, so can't go wrong there.
I agree.
That's acceptable.
Yes. Okay, you can use that one more time, rule of 3, but then you're done.
Yeah, I'm going to start using that all the time now. So. All right. We are getting close to the end. We have about 6 or 7 minutes left of the hour. So, Lindsay, I know you were asked a couple of questions directly on we asked people to post their questions. So if there are any of those that are really relevant to the topic at hand or the show, you can go ahead and read those off and answer them if you would. And if anyone watching has any last minute questions or anything, be sure to post them really quick. If we don't get to that on the show, though, we'll definitely reply in the comments, but you can leave them on the YouTube page if you're watching it on the show there. Or if you're watching it now on the site or in the future, through podcasts, iTunes or whatnot, you can always come back and leave the comment or question at thewritingpodcast.com/21.
All right. I have one from one of my beta readers. She was just helping out. And then another one on here from Edward. Let me see if I will do the first one first, because this is a popular one, or something a lot of people like to weigh in on, is kind of like, she asked, how do you build female characters? She's complimenting me. Yours are solid. And I think I know the answer is just to treat them as people, but how do you get there? And I think this comes out of a lot of people trying to build like these strong female characters and making them unappealing, or they're just so they're like the Mary Sues, or they're just kicking everybody's butt. I think Hollywood's notion of what a strong female character is very one-dimensional. I mean, not in every film, but like in a lot of the action movies, you're like, oh, well, she can kick everybody's butt, so she's a strong female character. Whereas I just treat them as people. I don't, like she said, I don't really make my male characters and my female characters are really that much different. I kind of had I've talked about this, I guess, on other shows, but I was in the Army for 4 years, which is very male dominated. It was very interesting coming from Seattle. It's very Southern too. There's a lot of that kind of culture, but very male dominated. So you'd be like maybe 10% women, 20%. It was definitely, you were the minority. And so I would see like when there were officers who were women, some of them, like people liked them. They were like, yeah, those are good officers. And other people you hated, you were like, gosh, she's such a bitch. And it's like, and it's maybe not fair because men can act the same way and not be labeled something derogatory. But so I guess I kind of keep that in mind a little bit when I'm making my characters, not to make them too overbearing, too all powerful, too arrogant, cocky. Just, I find it really unappealing when they're very cocky, male and female, but without having any humility or vulnerability on the side. So and as far as like just kind of making a strong female character, I always talk about, I have a friend that's she's who I think of when I think of like who is a strong person, strong female, whatever sex. But she started a commercial real estate business, many years ago. She was like a middle child of like 8 or 10 kids, I forget. But she was very successful in a male-dominated industry. But she's not at all like obnoxious or overbearing. She's very laid back and cool. And, she's someone who survived breast cancer, and I played tennis with her, and she's just a really cool person. And that's what I think of as the strong female character. She doesn't kick anybody's ass. Maybe on the tennis court, there's some of that, yes. But, there are ways to make women strong and empower them without resorting to martial prowess. And as somebody who's done some martial arts and a lot of sports and stuff, it's kind of ridiculous when you've got a 5'2", 100-pound woman, beating up all these guys in these Hollywood flicks. It's just, a little. Not that you can't be a competent person, but when you've got people like coming up against people of equal training, I'm going to give the edge to the guy usually. But so my point is, for female characters, they don't have to be badasses. Even in fantasy and science fiction, genre is notorious for having a lot of ass kicking going on. There are other ways to make a person competent. They can be really good at their job. They can be a survivor. They can be a mom. The friend I mentioned has grown kids that are successful. And so it doesn't have to be, I would just say avoid trying too hard. Maybe that's the answer. It's like when you try really hard to make them so badass, it's easy to make the character actually not that likable.
Yeah, for sure. And I have a couple comments about that too, but we did get someone that posted a comment on the YouTube page just a moment ago. And for some reason it just went through. It says it's 26 minutes old, but it didn't show up until now. So I'm just going to read this really quick in case there's a question. I haven't pre-read it, so who knows what I'm about to say, but it's from Linda, Washington. So first off, thanks for watching the show live or just in general. And let's see, not able to comment on the page. Wasn't working last week. Okay, we'll look into that. She was saying that the comment system for her wasn't working on the main page. Let's see, Lindsay, my husband was a pilot, and he did have one little ritual he used when the flight was not going well. I wouldn't call it superstition exactly, but it was definitely a ritual. So there's at least some fact in what you did to your character. So that's good for you to know.
Yeah, I have a guy that writes me whenever I send out a newsletter, and he said he used to be I think it was a Navy pilot. But anyway, he's like, yeah, I was a lot like that. You'd be amazed at how many the O'Neill types. It's actually pretty, I guess, in the Air Force. I can't even imagine that coming in the Army, especially, I came through enlisted, but I didn't see a lot of that. But I think when you get like really smart people and they're really good at their job, naturally there's going to be some of that cockiness. And but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So
did you have a question too, or just
that? And I think
thank you.
She posted that, when we were probably talking about that the first time, but for some reason it didn't update on YouTube on the live feed, so I had to refresh to get it. So sorry about that, Linda, but hopefully you're still listening and was able to hear us comment on it. But so going back to what we were talking about just a moment before that about writing female characters. So I'm sure it's a little different for Lindsay or women that are watching that are writing female characters because you are one, right? So it'll be a unique perspective maybe coming from me, but all my characters that I had written up until I started writing with my wife had been male main characters. I had written of females and never from their point of view. So going into the genre that she was writing is all the main characters for the most part, 95% are female, urban fantasy, paranormal, urban fantasy, kind of light romance. And so for me, I don't know, I don't really see their gender, so to say, when I'm putting them out there as far as developing what the character is like. Like they could be a male and have the same story arc, the same things, same problems, and same wants and desires apply. I know there are some differences, obviously, but I would say, they all have real weaknesses, and you don't have to like overcompensate for either gender towards anything. But stereotypes and how people view them at least are real. So you can, I would say, definitely put some of that in the story. That's fine if you have people in the story that don't think the character can do something because they're female. Those things are real as far as how people view them. So obviously there's going to be characters in your writing that'll view that character differently because of their gender. So don't skip over that and think that you don't want to tiptoe on things like that and make it unrealistic. I mean, you don't want to make it like a crusade about sexuality unless that's what your story revolves around, of course. And also, one thing I've noticed, you were talking about the female characters being too strong or too strong in a martial kind of way. I've noticed that a lot too. I mean, this goes back a long ways too, of course, and into the present. Like, first thing that came to my mind talking about movies again is like the original Terminator movies, right? With his mom, Sarah Connor, and she's like, she could kill it. Everyone, doesn't matter. Like all the five guards on her in the hospital or mental institute or whatever, it's fine. She could beat them all up and break out. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's not that interesting. So don't be afraid to give your character help, I would say too. Like if they can't do something because, like Lindsay said, maybe they are 5'2" and 90 pounds and they're being attacked by this martial trained 300-pound guy, odds are, unless they have some kind of upper hand, it's not realistic if they can turn it around. So it's fine to give characters like that help without it seeming like you're belittling that gender or anything. So I'd say, don't be afraid to do that, and don't be afraid also to have people in the stories view people with stereotypes, because that's how people in the real world work. So
yeah, and you can always, if you do want them to be it's a combat story, they can be good at something else. Marksmanship is not gender specific. I have very few, I used to do really well on the shooting range in the Army, and I had no passion for it whatsoever. So it's not like you have to be a certain sex to shoot a bow or a gun. So depending on your world and what's going on, that can be quite the equalizer. I have no problem with Sarah Connor when she's shooting everybody. Guns kill people. It happens. But yeah, when you've got them, I know it's cool for the screen is why you get a lot of this fighting stuff, and I understand. So, but anyway, should I ask, Edward had a couple questions. We can close it out after that.
Sure.
First one is, do you have a limit for the number of main characters per novel, novella, short story? And I think we kind of covered that, but it is a good point that probably in a short story, you want to limit yourself to one, definitely like one main character. Novella, maybe two, and then when you get into novel range or multiple novels, you have more room for development. But as I was saying, if you have too many characters, none of them stick in the reader's head, and it becomes a little confusing, and you forget whose story this is. And so for short story, definitely, I've seen it recommended other places, just one hero and maybe some side characters.
Yeah, and again, like you said earlier, Lindsay, to that same point is, if your character could just be combined into another character, why not do it? One of the things in writing and self-editing is if a word isn't needed to get the same point across, cut that word or sentence or paragraph, whatever it may be, scene, even, use the least real estate as far as words and stuff you need to get the point across or get what's happening. You were talking about writing fast paced. That's part of it, right? Taking out all that gunk in the middle. So if a character is, the same way, if they're not completely needed, if they're throwaway characters, see if you can combine them into another character instead, or just cut them completely, and it'll probably make the story better. And like you said, it's really hard to keep track of, more than probably 3 or 4 main characters in a 75,000 word book. So.
Right, and you can get away with more in epic fantasy when you're writing an 8-book series, but I find that it's easier to get the people to stick with it and read it if you've fewer point of view characters you have, and later on you can expand if they're still with you after book 3. Yeah.
And then you get, with the multiple point of views, you get the same thing, like I was referencing Game of Thrones novels earlier. When I was reading those, first time, I was always like, man, I wish you would hurry up and get to one of these 3 characters. That's the only 3 I really wanted to read. So I don't think you want to run into that situation either, because there were lots of chapters in that. I was like, I'm tempted to either skim through this or skip it to get to who I like, so don't want to run
Yeah.
into that.
I honestly don't pick up epic fantasy anymore for that reason. I always had that experience where like sometimes the character you like would be gone for like 100 or 200 pages and he's not even on the page. And if you're not that invested in the other characters, you start skimming and then you lose track of the plot. And
yeah, it's not fun. I mean, I still haven't finished the last Song of Ice and Fire. Like I've been reading, a couple chapters a week or something for, I don't know, a year, 5 years, my entire life, however long it took. But yeah, like the second to last book, the one I finished, 3 of my favorite characters aren't in that book just because, I don't know why. But having to wait a long time to get back to the characters you like is not fun, and you may turn readers off. So.
All right, he had one other kind of half to that question is, how late can you introduce a character into a story? 1/3 of the way, halfway? And I would say, I think maybe this is kind of an epic fantasy thing again, or fantasy science fiction, where you're having a big cast. You can probably get away with it more. If you're doing a mystery or a romance, you want your hero on chapter 1, page 1. And I think even if you're doing epic fantasy, you need a really compelling protagonist right there at the beginning, or people aren't going to give you a shot. I used to see it a lot in my workshop, and I don't know, I'm not real up, like I was saying, on epic fantasy now, but I think you see less of this where like each of the first 4 chapters would introduce a different character and be in a different part of the world. And you're kind of reading these and you're like, when are these going to have anything to do with each other? And it really takes a patient, certain kind of reader to get into that world. I'm not going to say there's not that kind of reader. Obviously there is. Look how popular, Robert Jordan was and George R. R. Martin is. And
Lindsay, you're making me want to scrap my new manuscript because it has exactly 4 point of views, and the first 4 chapters are from each one. So yeah, I'm just gonna burn it.
If I was doing it, I would make sure that it's really obvious how things tie together.
Right.
I think, but I've seen it where like we're in one land, we're in the other land, they have nothing to do together. Yeah. So I think go ahead, don't ignore me. That's fine. You can, but I do think you risk losing people that way. And if your goal is to make a successful series and appeal to a lot of readers in your genre, it's just something worth thinking about. How in love with that idea are you? If you totally love it and you want to do it, do it. It's, you'll find out, see what the reviews are later. It's not like you can't write another series if it doesn't work. And I could be totally wrong, and it could be so awesome that people will read it anyway. I would say that people who are really good at plot and really good at making page turners can get away with less scintillating characters. I always thought like sort of the John Grisham styles. I read a few of those at one point, and the characters were kind of the same in every book, but the plots were very compelling and kept you reading, and you wanted to read the next one. So there are definitely people that are really good at that stuff and can get away with less on the character front. And then the same goes the other way. I probably go more that way, where I can probably get away with not having the most brilliant plots and clever twists and things like that. I think my characters are pretty fun, and that's what people enjoy. That's what they read for. So, and if you can do both, excellent, good. You've got a great career ahead of you.
For sure. And that kind of loops back around what we talked about at the beginning of the show. There are readers for both types. So this show, of course, this episode is revolving around characters and strong characters, character development. And it sounds like Lindsay and I prefer the same writing and reading wise on that front. But there's definitely a huge group of readers out there that are in it more for the plot. And that's a testament to that is, like you said, those novels, that the mainstream novels where the main character is basically the same person, same skin, different name, in a new mystery or action situation. And that's completely fine to just expect to appeal to that group of readers if you're doing that. And as far as multiple characters, though, kind of going back to that a little bit, make sure you have enough room in your book to flesh them all out. The worst thing would be to get to your 75 or 80,000 words, if that's what your novels generally are. And because you had so many characters to get somewhere and do something with, there's not much story in it. So I don't even think amazing characters can turn that around as much. So.
Yeah, and when I have done 6 point of view characters, the novel was over 200,000 words, and my style is usually around 100,000 words. So and you can't charge really much more. I charge $1 more for that one than for the rest of the series. But so that's something to keep in mind too. Like, is this just your dream? That you don't really care if you ever make any money from it, or you're hoping to write lots of books and lots of series over the course of your career? Then to be able to write stories that are complete in under 100,000 words is not a bad idea if you want to maximize your use of time and earnings on each book. And that probably means 1 or 2 point of view characters for, until you get up there in the Chihuahua Killer, Door Stopper kind of books. Then you can have 6 and you've got time to develop them all. But in a normal length novel, probably just a couple characters, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. So, all right, we are past time a little bit. So, if anyone had other questions, I know there are some comments still. Like I said, we'll be happy to answer them after the show, even if you're listening to this, weeks, months ahead on iTunes or somewhere. Come back to the YouTube page or the writingpodcast.com/21. We'll get a notification that you'll have to comment. We'll be happy to answer them in text. So, we did have, while you're talking, Quotidian Light left 2 comments. So first off, thanks for watching live. She said Lyndon in the show The Killing, I've never seen it, was tiny, and she always appreciated that her size made her vulnerable and changed how she had to protect herself or how she approached things. So, I agree, even without seeing that show, that, you don't have to shy away from things just because of stereotypes or genders, and make them overcome things how they would really have to in the real world, not or some sort of unbelievable ninja type character, right? So
yeah, and that actually becomes a flaw and something that you can work with in a way. I mean, it's not like it's their fault. Yeah. You're born short. That's how it is. Yeah, I've done. If you can be picked up by the bad guy, that's kind of a bummer. So that's something you have to deal with as a challenge as a character. So it's good.
That's a good scene. The bad guy just picks him up and throws him off the cliff, throws him off the ship, whatever. So she also commented again and said, great episode. She really likes the thoughts on making strong female characters that are realistic and likable. So thank you for that. And we appreciate you watching and commenting. So.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And so that's all I had. I had a couple other things scribbled down, but we're already past time, so we'll go ahead and call it. The plan is to have a guest on next week. And before we go, before I say this, Lindsay, did you have anything else you want to say about character or any closing or anything before I wrap it up?
Yeah, I think I've rambled quite a while. I remember before we started recording, I'm like, Adam, we can do a short show tonight. Don't worry, half hour is fine.
And I said, yeah, that's fine with me. And then here we are, an hour and 10 minutes. So we just like talking, but we're cooped up writing all the time. We don't get to talk to anyone. So, but what I wanted to say before we wrap it up is, predominantly before our summer break, the shows where, we touched on process and craft a little bit, but it was predominantly self-publishing, how to market, things like that, and what works to make money. And then since we've been back, we've been talking about a little bit about that, but also veering more towards craft and shows episodes like this. And we're definitely going to interview people still about their self-publishing and, of course, their writing process and craft and things like that. But we're really curious what you guys watching and listening like best, what's most helpful for you. And, we'll kind of mold the show more in that direction. So if you would rather us shut up about characters and just talk about how much we made from self-publishing, since midnight last night or something, we can do that. Just let us know. You can email the show, leave comments on YouTube, on the website. There's all kinds of ways to get a hold of us. So just let us know which way you prefer, and we'll be happy to veer the show in that direction. So, all right, that does it for me. We'll be back here next week, same time, again, Sundays at 8 Eastern now. And for anyone watching, wanting the shows to get onto iTunes to re-listen or to be able to hear the whole thing, skip it around and whatnot, someone alerted me that they weren't uploading since we've been back, and I think maybe I let the subscription fall off for the uploads. So I'll go check that out tonight, and they should be back up there within a day of the new episodes. So I'll get that all squared away. But anyway, we'll see you guys next week. And again, thanks for watching and or listening.
Bye-bye.